On the kind of rainy afternoon where the sky hung heavy with clouds, Emily ducked into a small thrift shop to escape the cold. It was one of those places packed with forgotten relics of other people's lives. Rows of dusty books, shelves of mismatched dishes, and furniture that creaked just by looking at it. Leaning against the wall, almost tucked away behind an old armoire, was an antique mirror. Its frame was intricate, carved with vines and roses, the gold paint peeling just enough to hint at its age. Emily wasn't one for antiques, but something about the mirror called to her. It felt important, though she couldn't explain why. The tag dangling from the corner said $20, a bargain for something that looked like it belonged in a museum. The woman at the counter wrapped it carefully, her eyes lingering on Emily a moment too long. "Be careful with this one," the woman said softly, almost as an afterthought. That evening, she set the mirror up in her bedroom, propping it against the wall while she figured out where to hang it. She stood back to admire it, and for a moment, felt a strange shiver. Her reflection stared back, but the depth of the glass made it seem like she was looking into another world entirely. At first, she didn't notice anything odd. A tilt of her head, a flick of her hair, everything seemed fine. But as she turned to grab her phone from the bed, something in her peripheral vision caught her attention. Her reflection moved slower than she did. Emily froze, her heart skipping a beat. Slowly, she turned back toward the mirror, finding her reflection standing there, watching her. She lifted her hand experimentally. The glass version of herself mirrored the movement, but just slightly out of sync. "I'm exhausted," Emily muttered under her breath, shaking off the unease. She convinced herself it was a trick of the old wavy glass, or maybe her mind playing games. Still, that night, she tossed and turned in bed as the uneasy feeling crept back in. The next morning, all seemed normal. She checked the mirror cautiously, sticking out her tongue and waving her hands like an idiot, but nothing strange happened. Yet by evening, after returning home from work, her reflection seemed different. Its expression didn't quite match hers. There was a hint of something in the eyes, a flicker of sharp awareness that she couldn't ignore. She leaned in close until her nose nearly touched the glass and whispered, "What are you?" The reflection smiled. Emily hadn't. Her scream filled the room as she stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. When she looked again, her reflection was back to normal, her panicked face mirroring hers perfectly. Over the next few days, Emily couldn't avoid the feeling that the mirror was watching her. She started covering it with a blanket at night, but sometimes she'd wake to find the blanket on the floor, as though it had slipped off on its own. And the reflection wasn't always her. Once, she swore she saw it standing in an entirely different room. She didn't own that kind of dark, cold room. On the third night, she woke up to a strange sound, like whispering. Her heart pounded as she flipped on the light. The blanket covering the mirror had fallen again, and for the first time, the reflection wasn't hers at all. A woman in a black, high-collared dress stared back at her, her hands pressed against the glass as though she were trying to get out. Emily didn't scream this time. She was too frozen with terror. The woman's lips moved silently, but her eyes blazed with desperation. Emily grabbed the mirror, dragged it out of her apartment, and drove furiously back to the thrift shop. The store was closed, but she didn't care. She left it on the sidewalk outside the door, her breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. When she climbed back into her car, she glanced nervously into the rearview mirror. For a split second, she thought she saw the woman in black standing behind her car, her pale hand raised in a wave. By the time Emily blinked, the figure was gone. She didn't go back to the thrift shop, and she didn't buy another mirror for a long, long time.